everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the next installment in our Leaders as Readers series. Leaders as Readers, for those of you who might not know, is a literary event series for readers by readers. Literature has touched the lives of many in a variety of ways, and we want to grow and celebrate the stories that have influenced us, taught us, helped us grow, and challenged us and changed us. We invite local and influential members of our community so that we can talk to them about books and stories, asking questions like, what was the book that made you fall in love with reading? What book has changed your life? What books do you recommend everyone read at least once? All of these questions and more will be answered as we go beyond the surface, dive into the magic of books, and authentically engage with the community through the best way we, as Tattered Cover Bookstore, know how, through stories. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Just a quick update and housekeeping about Tattered Cover. Right now, 3 out of our 4 stores are open. You can come in as long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose. We are still asking that customers come in wearing a mask due to the younger nature of our patrons and young families. We want to protect our staff and our customer base, so we appreciate you for accommodating that. We also want to thank you for shopping locally. This is a huge deal for us because we wouldn't have gotten through the last year or the last 50 without you, because believe it or not, it is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary, which is a huge deal. And we owe a large part of that success to you, our community. And so we thank you so much for that. Another way that you can support us is by going online to tatteredcover.com and joining our events, purchasing books online. There's so many things that you can find there. Great book recommendations galore. So we have upcoming events. We have more Leaders as Readers in our series, and you can check out all of that at tatteredcover.com/event. But the guest that we have today, I'm very excited for. Already just before when we were talking, before we hit the live button, I'm thrilled. It's going to be so much fun, filled with amazing recommendations. We have Rachel Carlson on as our guest this evening. Rachel Carlson is the co-founder and CEO of Guild Education, a fast-growing company that helps employers offer higher education to their frontline employees. Guild is on a mission to unlock opportunity for the 88 million Americans who are in need of education and reskilling in order to compete in the future of work. Guild partners with Fortune 1000 companies like Walmart, Walt Disney Company, Chipotle, Lowe's, Discover Financial, helping their employees go back to school, and in partnership with leading nonprofit universities. Guild has been listed on the Forbes Cloud 100 list and named a Fast Company's most innovative company, Women-Owned Business of the Year, and Employee Initiative of the Year. Prior to founding Guild, Rachel was the CEO of the Student Blueprint and has worked for the 2008 Obama campaign before serving in the Obama White House. Rachel holds an MBA from Stanford's Graduate School of Business, as well as an MA in Education and a BA in Political Science from Stanford University. She lives in Denver with her husband David and her twin girls, Lily Grace and Magnolia. And it is my honor to welcome Rachel as our Leaders as Readers guest this afternoon. I'm going to change over my screen here and we'll unmute Rachel so we can get great book recommendations. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
We are thrilled to have you here. As a Denver native, I'm sure, like myself, that you're in love with Tattered Cover, and we were talking beforehand about how you're just a big reader and big fan of books. So we're honored to have you.
It is the price of admission in my family to fall in love with reading, and I have drank the Kool-Aid hard. So this is really fun because Tattered Cover is our favorite store, and I was excited when my friend and somebody I looked up to, Kwame, took over the business. So just very excited to be here today.
Well, it's awesome. We're thrilled to go through this with you, and you were one of the very top on our list to have invited to do this series with us. We have so many questions that we can get through, but I would love to start at the beginning of, it seems like an obvious question, but did you read as a child? And if so, who or what initiated that love of reading in your life?
Yeah. So my mom, and to like back it up one level, because you asked about me, but I can't really talk about my love of reading without talking about my family. On my mom's side of the family, my grandfather only finished 8th grade. He was an orphaned immigrant from Eastern Europe. And my grandmother only finished high school, but they were both incredibly bright and they themselves loved to read. And so as I've been told, my grandmother taught all 9 children, how to read. And as the youngest, my mom sat next to her 2 older brothers, numbers 7 and 8, while they were in pre-K and kindergarten. And she actually learned how to read at age 3. And so the best part is that with so many kids in the house, she was still in a crib in her parents' room at 3, because as baby number 9, you sleep wherever somebody will let you, but she could read. So she had a nightlight on her crib and would read herself to sleep at age 3. So like, again, price of admissions, like you had to love reading in our family. And like the treat was to get to read longer at night, both for her growing up and for us. Like if we were, well behaved at dinner, we got to read for more minutes going to bed. So I grew up spending a whole lot of time at Tattered Cover in Cherry Creek when it was there. And then we went to the library every week. We were allowed up to 10 books per week. And then we did that summer contest where you would, get to mark how many books you read each summer. And so I loved Madeline when I was little. I then fell in love with the Felicity American Girl doll books. Felicity is my girl, though I think we all look back on those books with like a little bit of perspective on how we could have probably learned a little bit more about all sides of American history. But that said, it certainly nurtured a lot of love for me. And then I have this book that I read, I think 100 times, called Sarah Morton's Day. And it was about this Amish girl who lived in modern times, but on an Amish plantation. And I was so obsessed with how different her life was from mine. I think it was like an early experience of empathy. And I read it hundreds of times. I begged my mom to take me to Pennsylvania. I would like research Amish camps on AOL.com with like little dial tone in the background. And that was my early reading days.
That's amazing. And I love that you know them right away. And I love the idea that you talked about books opening a door to empathy in your life, because that's we talk often about them being a window or a mirror. And I love hearing that started so early for you. Is that something that you say price of admission in your family? Is that something you're sharing with your girls right now? What books are you all reading with them?
Yeah. So it's been so fun. Their favorite book, actually really similar, I guess, to my experience. They love this book called This Is How We Do It. And it's an author who went and met with 8 families around the world and followed their kind of 4 through 8-year-old, whatever age they had as their youngest, through their day. And so on each page, you watch how to 8 kids around the world eat breakfast, how to 8 kids around the world get to school. And there are low income families on there. There are, kind of upper class families in Iran and in, you name it, part of Russia, town I had never heard of. It's like this really cool book, and my girls are obsessed with it. So we've read that one 85 times at this point. And then right now, the favorites are any book about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Michelle Obama. They were Ruth and Michelle for Halloween. And the favorite one right now is Parker Looks Up, which is about, that one. And it's about the National Gallery portrait of Michelle Obama, young Black girl, Parker Looks Up. And so my little Lily has asked grandma to sew her the Parker Looks Up dress of the National Gallery. So the costume is like the little National Gallery version of Michelle Obama's dress. So anyway, we are Ruth and Michelle Long in our household right now.
That's incredible. That is, my heart just swelled so big. I can't even stand myself. I love it. I love it. I love it. I have to ask though too. So you talked early about books, Madeline and American Girl, that fell in love with reading as a young child, but were there any books in your teen years or young adult years that also were very formative for you? Something that made that jump, so to speak, of loving reading as a kid, but then it continued in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I literally have read myself to sleep every night since I can remember, to a point where it's actually like dependent. I can't go to sleep without reading. My husband jokes that my e-reader is like the 3rd member of our marriage, because I literally fall asleep with it. But we won't go any further on how he feels about that.
But if it makes you feel any better, I can't tell you how many times I found a bookmark like stuck on my face, or my poor boyfriend has like a book slid under his pillow, half open, page bent. Totally understandable.
You get it. So I think the book that defines for me that transition, and honestly, Kwame and I both went to East, across the street from one of your stores. And I loved a lot about East. I actually read probably more about like constitutional law and probably applied my reading skills more. I don't know that I had my fiction love nurtured in high school nor college. That it has mostly been in my free time that I've nurtured my love of fiction. But in 7th and 8th grade, I had a great teacher at Stanley who introduced me to The Red Tent. And I think I've reread that book more than just about any. And at you're 12. One, it's like normalizing the idea of menstruation and women's bodies. But way bigger than that. It's the Bible from a woman's perspective, basically. And at that point in life, I don't think I had figured out much at all about my views on history, organized religion, spirituality, where the lines started and crossed on that. I think I've got a little more sense of that now, but I'm going to probably be working on that till I read my last book. But at 7th and 8th grade, it was like a real awakening for me. And I think that's the book I've read most in life.
That makes me, the Red Tent was formative for me as well. And actually, believe it or not, today, Anita Diamont, the author, has a new book coming out called Period that she wrote with her daughter, which, yep, literally, it just came out today. And it's about like America's history and relationship with female menstruation and how the history of it, because the Red Tent was so formative fictionally for so many people. She's been working on this project for years. So that's a recommendation for you and for viewers. But
thank you. That's not why I came today, but I'll take every rec you give me and I'll give a few.
Sounds wonderful. Well, I'm glad to hear that about that there was, you know, a love of reading that still continued in your life. And I'm curious about not just what books you read, but how you read and where you read. You talked about reading before bed, but do you have any other like favorite reading nooks or spots that give you comfort?
Yeah. So I said a little bit about my mom's side of the family and like love of reading. Literally none of them sleep either. They all read in the middle of the night. Like we're all crazy people who read books every night. But on my dad's side of the family, my grandfather, who is, I think, Tattered Covers, like most addicted customer. Like you don't get Christmas for 20 years has been a book from Tattered Cover. If you want something else from grandpa, good luck, find another grandpa. Like that's it. He and his favorite day of the year is like December 22nd, where y'all help him go through and pick out every book. So thank you for doing that for our family for many years. He has a library at the he and my grandma in 1959 bought this little ranch in Bailey, Colorado, and it's now our family gathering spot. They've built more and more bedrooms as we've gone from, you know, they have 7 kids, and so there's now 22 grandkids, 7 kids and spouses, etc. He built a library there that has all of his books that he accumulated over his career, and as governor of Colorado, he was gifted a lot of books. And it's this dark, really mahogany leather, smells like books kind of book nook cave that has a chessboard and books. That's it. And so that's my favorite place to read because it's got all of his and my grandma, who is an educator, all of their books from 92 years. So you've got all of her. She's a child development wonk. She built preschools here in Denver. So there's tons of books that I love around child development that she has on her shelf. He has like every book that he read when he was at Yale Divinity School as sort of he was there as like a skeptic. So it's a lot of like him trying to unpack his own religion and a lot of notes in the margins, like every Robert Caro book known to man and every book that reads like a Robert Caro book. And then just hundreds of great fiction. So I'm at this point an e-reader, but when I go up there, I always end up grabbing something and finding a corner for a while.
That sounds like a slice of heaven right there. That sounds amazing. I have to ask, because you mentioned your grandmother having child development books and your grandfather having fiction books. Do you have a preference of nonfiction versus fiction, or is it very much a mood reading thing for you?
I'm like nervous somebody in my life teed you off on this because my friends and my family think I'm weird about how clear line I am about this. I read fiction at night. I read newspapers first thing in the morning, and then I read nonfiction like throughout the day, but I can't do nonfiction last thing at night, or else my head thinks about work, because a lot of the nonfiction I read is tied to like leadership and management and education policy. So I literally have like a discipline about it.
I swear nobody led me on to that one. I was encouraged.
I'm like flying my dork flag really hard here today, and I'm loving it. And I'm like, my friends are going to legitimately make fun of me because these are like deep to who I am principles of my life.
Well, one, thank you for your candor. Like the fact, I think what you'll find in this reading community is that you're not alone. You know, I love that you have set rules for your reading, but I also love that your reading is so varied, right? So there's people that are like, this is my genre, this is my lane. And whereas instead you have this breadth. Do you have some of those nonfiction management leadership books that maybe have helped you or guided you into the professional you are today?
Yeah. So when I'm struggling, I like turn inward to reading. I loved I'd never heard window and mirror. What a great analogy. I think like as a child and when I'm approaching a new subject, it's very window. And when I'm struggling, it's very mirror. And so I think in 2020, I was like looking for a lot of mirror. So books that made a big impact for me, anything written by Brene Brown, but Gifts of Imperfection had more impact on my life than like just about anything. I made my girlfriends at the end of 2019 when I was like searching for whether I kind of had it in me to be the leader for the next chapter of Guild. And like as a mom, my girls were 1.5. I was just really overwhelmed. I convinced my best girlfriends to come with me. We did like a weekend away and we all brought Gifts of Imperfection and like reread it and discussed it by ourselves in San Diego. It was like a little mom's trip. So that book is really, really important to me because it gave me like the second jolt of confidence in myself that like I could be an imperfect leader, an imperfect mom and figure it out. So that one's really important to me. I get like a little emotional talking about it.
I'm getting emotional listening to as a woman, and I'm not a mother, but as a woman in any professional industry and the challenges that we face with that, Brene does such a good job at being able to help us understand ourselves more. And so I'm so that's just an honor to hear that we're not alone in that. So
yeah,
thank you.
Her books are mirrors through and through. My second and my family was like, you have to stop talking about this book because I read it and then talked about it for 2 years. But Sapiens is, I think, the book that made me think more than any book I've ever read. And it's kind of meta for this, right? Because like I think the golden nugget, there's a lot of nuggets in Sapiens, but I think the golden nugget is that storytelling is one of, if not the fundamental human characteristic that defines like who we are and defines our ability to pass down everything from like stories to medicine to the rule of law from one generation to another, right? Like the idea of justice as a story, the idea of democracy as a story. I think we should be talking about that right now. Like, are we going to pass the democratic tradition on to our children and grandchildren? Like, Sapiens opened my mind up so much. I guess that one's a little bit in the window and mirror category, but it totally blew my mind. And I talk about it all the time. I gave it to every leader at Guild one year for Christmas.
Oh, but that's see, and that leads me into my next question of like, what are books that you believe everyone needs to read in their lifetime? And so Sapiens, I would say, is definitely one of them up there, especially if you gifted it to everybody. Do you have any others you would put in that category?
Okay, yeah. So like anybody who's been I'll call it IQ educated needs to just like read the canon of Brene Brown and give yourself some EQ education because it turns out too many of us got too many master's degrees and not enough minors in our own emotional intelligence. So that one I tell
a bumper sticker or I love that. Too many of us got master's degrees, but not enough minors in our own self-education. I love that.
Yeah, that one I feel passionate about. When breath becomes air, like totally changed how I think about mortality. And I had I don't even know what to call it. I had there was like a kismet moment. I read that book while my co-founder lost her dad. And so getting to like learn about her grieving process while reading that book was really powerful for me. And then this is just me soapboxing on policy issues for a second here, but to the end of June lit my passion for foster care reform. And I think Denver right now is dealing with a lot of issues about how we support our foster care systems. And there are really good people trying to fix that system who are struggling right now, whether it's in the public sector or the nonprofit. And so I would love if a lot of Denverites and all of our policymakers would read to the end of June. And then I love whatever it takes. Jeff Canada is one of my heroes. He's now a Guild advisor, which was like the great joy of my life that I was able to meet him and then reel him into my world. But his journey building Harlem Children's Zone. I think we also in Denver right now have a over politicized conversation about our schools. Of this charter reform versus unionized conversation. And I think Jeff Canada has really charted a middle way. And I would love for more Denver folks to think about what's going to be our middle way to make sure that, Denver public schools and our surrounding communities and counties are a place where we put children first and not the debate on one or other side of a bunch of adults.
No, absolutely. And but again, that goes back, we're just going to continue the window and mirror thing, but that talking about public policy and books that are written on that are a huge window into education of subjects that not a lot of us maybe have studied. I mean, I'm a theater and English major, and those are things that I never would have touched but books open those doors. So those are great recommendations, especially if somebody's looking into more of what's going on in our community, what's actively going on in our community, and subjects that they might find a passion in that they wouldn't have otherwise. So that's excellent. Throughout this conversation, we've talked about your family, price of admission, the fact that in a way, like stories, reading was passed through in your family. That was how you all communicated with one another and still do that. But I want to know for you personally, what value do books bring to your life? Because you could have just given it up. You could have just been like, that's something my family does. But what do books and reading do for you specifically?
Yeah. So I think as a kid and early on, it's like, I think books actually create a sense of independence. Like I felt, as early when you're a 2-year-old pulling the book off the shelf, and then when you're a 6-year-old walking in with your library card, like, we had an allowance, but I felt more agency walking into a library than just about anywhere, because I was in charge of my choice. And then I was in charge of how I spent my time, and I got to choose what I wanted to learn. And I think, easy for us to talk about American policy issues, but we still have, hundreds of millions, if not billions of women around the world who don't even have the privilege to learn how to read. And it should be a right, not a privilege. So I think independence is it's easy to forget that we should be grateful that we have the privilege to read. So that I just remember feeling so empowered as a young kid. Empathy, I think, is probably the most important, and I'm always working to build my empathy muscle, because I don't know that there's a destination on that one. It's a journey, but I think you learn so much about other people through story and through books. And I think, especially in a year where we've talked a lot about diversity and equity and inclusion, I think empathy is the muscle that allows us to express all of those outcomes if we nurture it. So I think making sure kids build empathy through learning is so important, and I'm so glad that it is a muscle I learned. I'm not done building it. And then I guess learner, we call it, growth mindset, Angela Duckworth, but we at Guild, it's one of our core values. We call it learner's mindset. Same concept generally, but the fact that I can constantly approach what my grandpa always says, which is there is no one truth, there are multiple truths. And the ability to always be able to turn to another book to challenge my brain to learn something new or find another truth to something that I think is, anytime I get to a point where I'm like, I believe this, or I'm getting kind of dogmatic about something, I'll be like, oh, wait, it's probably time to read something written by somebody who believes something else on that same topic. And so that beginner's learner's mindset is something that I really value that books give me.
I want to ask really quickly about the privilege of reading, and that it should be a right and not a privilege. And I'm curious, there is one thing that you had said about education is the most efficient way to distribute opportunity. And I'm wondering, what can books and bookstores specifically do to add to that distribution and help make reading more of a right than a privilege?
Yeah. So, I think a lot about elite higher ed and about what kind of gates we've put around higher education and how do we tear down those gates. I think, right or wrong, there is sometimes a perception that the literacy community can do something similar in putting gates. I think it's really simple about making reading accessible and helping people understand what's in it in that moment. One thing I love that you guys do is you put those summaries that you all, as the staff of Tattered Cover, write about the books. I don't look at the back of the book. I read the card that said, what did someone at Tattered Cover think about this? We do the same thing with our students at Guild, which is hey, what did people who have the same job as you at Walmart or Chipotle think of this class? You don't need to know what some Harvard professor thought about this theory. You need to know, how did learning people management make someone you admire at your company better at being a people manager? And why should you want to take that class or read that book? And so it's bringing the human into the recommendation. I also think that's really important in a world where algorithms drive way, I think about algorithms all the time because algorithms, unfortunately, are driving how people choose where to go to school. And my least favorite moment is when a student will tell me, oh my gosh, I wasn't sure if I should go back to school. And then it felt like the world was speaking to me because University of Phoenix was just putting advertisements all over my Facebook page and my Google. And it was time to go back to school. And then she's, $80,000 in debt at University of Phoenix, which has a pretty low graduation rate. I think we're at risk of the same thing happening in what we read. We talk about it in the news all the time, but I think the same conversation should be had about fiction and about, the other canons of books that aren't just about today's news. We need to not have a world where algorithms just feed us more of the last thing we liked in what we read. We need to have like diverse opinions. And so I think continuing to have conversation about books and learning from people who can say, oh, I loved this book because of this reason. And I can have nothing in common with you, but really connect with why you liked that book and say, well, I want to read that book too. And so I think the same conversation we're having about the polarization of news, the polarization of and distribution of information, we need to have that about books as well, or else we're going to end up in a world where we only read the books as the people who look and sound like us. And that's a world I don't want to live in.
I completely agree with that sentiment. And I'm curious if you have any, we kind of deviated into this part of the conversation, but do you have any of those books that really challenged you, that helped you either think about something in a different light, or even just a fiction book that you were like, I'm not so sure I picked this up, but then it really surprised you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So many. Like, where do I even go with that? I'm like about to pull up my list because I keep all my favorite books.
No, go for it.
Okay. So let's see. One, everything Kendi wrote this year and anti-racist, like totally opened my mind up to things I thought I knew that I did not know. Oh my gosh. Then that led me to Some of Us by Heather McGhee, which I think is now my favorite book on racism and about how racism costs everyone, and particularly emphasis on how do we help, how do we move from a zero-sum conversation about if this group benefits, then this group loses. And I, having spent time in higher education admissions prior in my life, that really is the conversation that happens in elite admissions. If we let in this low income person over this legacy student, or this person with this racial background over this person, because we designed an exclusive and zero-sum higher ed system, it's a horrible conversation that really made me want to leave the industry after a year in it. And so I love the Some of Us, how she applied that framework to everything, to housing, to access to education, et cetera. So that book changed my mind on some things. Mom Genes, Genes, not Geans.
Yeah.
So one of my read things of people I don't agree with, I read the Wall Street Journal op-ed most mornings because I don't agree with very much in it. I like a lot of their news. I love their news coverage. I don't agree with very much, but it iron sharpens iron. I like mentally arguing with their op-ed. But they wrote one that said liberals who want to argue that everything's same for men and women aren't going to like this book because it actually reckons with the realities of what's different after becoming a mom. And so I was like, okay, I need to read this. It's going to challenge me. And it's not as firebrand actually as the op-ed made it sound. It's actually saying yes, mom brain is real. You are forgetting things because you just moved a whole bunch of your gray matter from remembering facts to tuning in to the souls of other people. And I've actually been talking about it here at work, which is I do forget a lot more than I used to. My executive team jokes about it. One guy jokes that he's my institutional memory, but I forget way more than I did before having twins. But I think I'm more empathetic. I think I'm a better leader. I'm way better at tracking people's facial reactions to moments of stress when we have a tough leadership conversation. And I do sometimes forget whatever fact we debated yesterday. And this book actually puts the science behind that and says maybe we shouldn't make women pretend that nothing changes after they become moms. And so it's challenging my thinking a little bit. Those two come to mind. And then Untethered Soul's kind of blowing my mind right now. I've had a hard time. I try and meditate. I've tried to read as much about Buddhism as I can. I really want to access that way of thinking more than I've totally unlocked for myself. But Untethered Soul has cut through the noise better for me on the psyche and conscious better than any book. I've reread the first chapter of that book 3 times now because it there's something in the way that author writes that is helping me unlock what I think I've been struggling with in my own meditation practice.
That's amazing. That's going to be mine.
Okay. Yeah. You take that one. I got mine.
Because a lot of the ones you and I are on similar pages of, the audience is seeing me nod and everything, but all right, that's the one I'm writing.
Untethered Soul. I'm loving it.
So the last question I want to ask before we end, because I feel like I could talk to you for the next 4 hours, but we have to keep it on time here, is what is, in your view, the ultimate thing that books have taught you? And what do you still look forward to learning from them?
Yeah. So I guess on one dimension, I mean, we've talked a lot about like the intellectual and the like how it shapes us, but maybe the only thing I didn't talk about today, I mean, reading is truly my favorite hobby. And I don't normally start there. I fill out a lot of like CEO forms of like, what do you like to do or whatever. And because I feel like, you're supposed to, I'm like, oh, I'm in Colorado. I'm supposed to say I like running and yoga. And I do. I like running and yoga. And, it's how we identify as Coloradans. But like, honestly, when I'm going on a girls trip this weekend, or when my kids nap at the same time on a Saturday, like, what do I look forward to? A good book. That's literally all I crave in the world. I also like cookie dough, but I crave good books and cookie dough. And so like,
that's a blog. Reading, that's like a good books and cookie dough. That's like a blog or some sort of
like if I have 2 to 3 hours to myself and I don't, and I'm not doing one of my other joyful responsibilities, working or caring for my children or being with friends and family, there's nothing I love more than reading. So it is just my favorite thing. So, but it also just, I think, is the most powerful tool. And I think there's few things in the world that are both like so good for you and so fun.
I love that answer. Reading, so good for you and so fun. It's amazing.
I feel like I came in a little giddy for this one because I just love reading so much. So thank you for letting me just ooze my passion for reading today.
No, thank you for gifting us with it. I feel honored to be on the other side of this conversation. It's filled me with such joy today. So thank you so much for that. I have to just give you the chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and any other books that you cannot leave this interview without mentioning.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. So Rachel Carlson. I think actually what I want to say more is I try and post on LinkedIn about good books I'm reading, but my favorite thing is when I get good comments in response. Like when I posted I read like 107 books last year and tried to nail it down to my 10 favorites. But the best thing about publishing that list was I got like 30 good recommendations in response. So if you want to send me book recs, that would be my favorite gift from today. And then mine, gosh, I feel like I rattled through the ones I'm reading now that are my favorite recs. But yeah, I would read Mom Jeans. I would read Untethered Soul. And I'd reread The Red Tent. I do feel like, and I'm telling my husband to do it because we have 2 girls. I feel like The Red Tent should be in the canon of reading for anyone raising young women.
I agree. Rachel, this has been such a treat. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to your future reading lists. And speaking of which, I want to let everyone know that anyone who registered for today's event will get an email later this afternoon with all the books that Rachel mentioned on it. And we'll have that list on our website and social media as well. You got excited.
I thought of one more that I want to wreck on. Okay.
Please do.
Where the Crawdad Sings was my favorite book of 1819. And then I just found and read and devoured This Tender Land, which I think it reads really similarly, but I want the third. So if anyone knows like what is the next in that canon of books, I'm hungry for it. And I heard Where the Crawdad Sings is coming as a show, which will be fun too, but I want the third book.
It is. We just actually had an author event with Delia Owens on Friday and Mary Alice Monroe, which you can watch on our YouTube channel. And she gives us kind of some fun, hot goss little insiders about the show, which is wonderful.
Okay, so, love it. Okay. So that's my ask. I want another Crawdad, This Tender Land.
Yep.
For this summer.
I love it. All right. You've been challenged now by Rachel Carlson to get her some recommendations. And you could do that to her, send that to her on social media, LinkedIn as well. And I'm McKaylee with Tattered Cover Bookstore. Rachel, if you'll just stick around while I close this out here. Thank you all again for supporting local independent businesses, local independent bookstores. We would not be here without you. We appreciate you more than you know. And for some of you, maybe later this evening when you go for dinner, order from a local mom and pop restaurant. Supporting local businesses helps your community. So we thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading. Good afternoon, all. Bye.